My name is Alan Strathmore, and for 14 years I was the chief architect behind an $850 million financial system that never failed. Not once. I built it from the ground up, every line of code, every security protocol, every fail-safe that kept millions of dollars flowing smoothly through digital channels. At 50, I had the kind of expertise you can't buy or fake. The kind that comes from years of late nights, crisis management, and the deep understanding that only experience provides. The headquarters of Pinnacle Financial Solutions sat in downtown Chicago, a gleaming 40-story tower where I had my corner office on the 32nd floor. I wasn't just another employee. I was the backbone of their entire operation. When other systems crashed, when competitors faced cyber attacks, when the market volatility of 2020 through 2023 shook everyone else, our system stood firm. That was my doing. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists like this video, and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there for months. Richard Carrington, the CEO, had been making subtle comments about fresh perspectives and new blood in leadership meetings. His 28-year-old daughter Isla had started showing up to company events, asking questions about different departments with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to earn your place. Isla Carrington was everything I wasn't. Young, well-connected, armed with an MBA from Northwestern that her father probably paid for. She had never written a single line of code, never stayed up all night fixing a system crash, never felt the weight of knowing that one mistake could cost the company millions. But she had something I didn't, the right last name. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March 2025. "Alan, we need to talk," Richard said, closing his office door behind me. I had been in that office countless times, discussing system upgrades, security measures, strategic planning. This time felt different. His desk was cleaner than usual, and there was a manila folder sitting in the center. Never a good sign. "We've made a decision about the technical leadership structure," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "The board feels it's time for a change in direction." I sat there, hands folded, waiting. In 14 years, I had learned to control my reactions. Panic doesn't fix broken code. Anger doesn't solve system failures. You assess, you analyze, and then you act. "Isla will be taking over your responsibilities effective immediately," he continued. "She brings a fresh perspective and new ideas that align with our vision for the future." The irony was almost laughable. Fresh perspective, new ideas, as if running an $850 million financial system was like rearranging furniture in a college dorm room. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even raise my voice. "I see," I said simply. "And the transition timeline?" 2 weeks, Richard replied, sliding the manila folder across his desk. "We'll need you to document everything, transfer access credentials, and brief Isla and her team on the system architecture." Her team. She already had a team, probably fresh-faced graduates with computer science degrees and zero real-world experience. I opened the folder. Severance package, non-disclosure agreement, the usual corporate farewell kit. The numbers were generous, I'll give them that. Guilt money often is. "Will there be any technical support available during the transition?" I asked, still maintaining that calm, professional tone that had served me well over the years. "We'll handle it internally," Richard said, finally looking at me directly. "Isla is very confident in her team's abilities." Confident. That was the word that stuck with me as I walked back to my office. Not competent, not experienced. Confident. In my world, confidence without competence was just another word for dangerous. The next 2 weeks were the most methodical of my career. While Richard probably expected me to storm out or cause a scene, I did the opposite. I became the model of professionalism. Every morning I arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, just like I had for 14 years. I wore my best suits. I smiled politely at colleagues who awkwardly avoided eye contact, knowing what was happening but not knowing what to say. But I wasn't just going through the motions. I was documenting everything, and I mean everything. Every security protocol, every backup procedure, every quirk and workaround that kept the system running smoothly. Most importantly, I was identifying what I legally could and couldn't leave behind. You see, there's a difference between sabotage and simply taking what belongs to you. The core system architecture? That stayed. It was company property. But the custom scripts I'd written on my own time, the personal notes and shortcuts I'd developed, the specialized security protocols I'd created using my own methodologies, those were different. Those came with me. I spent hours with the company lawyers making sure every step I took was completely legal. I want to ensure a smooth transition, I told them, while protecting my own intellectual contributions. They saw it as due diligence. I saw it as insurance. Isla showed up on the Thursday of my first week. She walked into my office wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying a leather portfolio and that same confident smile I had seen at company parties. "Alan, hi," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm so excited to work with you during this transition. Richard, speaks so highly of your work." I shook her hand and gestured to the chair across from my desk. "I've prepared comprehensive documentation of all systems and procedures," I said, indicating the stack of binders I had assembled. "We should start with the core architecture overview." For the next hour, I walked her through the basics. Her eyes glazed over when I mentioned database optimization. She nodded blankly when I explained the backup rotation schedules. When I brought up the security authentication layers, she interrupted me. "This all seems very complicated," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Can't we just simplify it? Technology should make things easier, right?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "The system handles 850 million in transactions. Complexity often equals security and reliability." "But that's so old-school thinking," she replied, pulling out her iPhone. "Look at apps like Venmo or Cash App. They're simple and they work fine." I felt something twist in my stomach. Comparing a mission-critical financial system to consumer payment apps was like comparing a 747 to a paper airplane. Both fly, but one carries 300 people across oceans. "The regulatory requirements are quite different," I said gently. "SEC compliance, audit trails, fraud prevention, these add necessary layers." She was already looking at her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be social media. Right. Well, I'm sure we can modernize all of that." The team she brought in was exactly what I expected. 3 recent graduates from DePaul and UIC, all under 25, all talking about disrupting financial technology and streamlining legacy systems. They treated our meeting like a college study group, joking and casual, not grasping that they were about to inherit control of nearly $1 billion in financial infrastructure. "So what happens if we just delete all this old code and start fresh?" asked Tyler, a kid who looked like he had never worn a tie before in his life. "You'd crash the entire system and potentially face federal charges," I replied matter-of-factly. They laughed, thinking I was exaggerating. During my second week, I began the delicate process of removing my personal contributions to the system. The custom monitoring scripts I had written during weekends went with me. They were clearly my intellectual property, created on my own time. The specialized alerting system I had developed using my own methodology was backed up to my personal drives before being replaced with standard protocols. Most importantly, I removed what I called my guardian angels, the automated correction scripts that had been quietly fixing small errors and preventing larger problems for years. These weren't in any official documentation because they were my personal additions, patches I had created to address issues as they arose. The system would run without them, but it would be vulnerable to the kinds of small cascading failures that I had learned to prevent. I also changed all my personal passwords and revoked my administrative access to external security consultants I had worked with over the years, consultants who Isla didn't even know existed. If they wanted to contact those resources, they'd have to discover them and build those relationships themselves. On my last Friday, I called a final meeting with Isla and her team. I walked them through the handoff procedures one more time, emphasizing the critical backup schedules, the monthly security audits, and the importance of the change management protocols I had established. "This is like a lot of rules," said Madison, another team member. "Can't we just trust our instincts and adapt as we go?" "Financial systems require methodical approaches," I explained. "One wrong change can have cascading effects." Isla was checking her smartwatch during most of my explanation. "Alan, I appreciate your thoroughness, but we've got this. My team is really innovative. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Just remember that in this case, those eggs are worth $850 million. She laughed. "You worry too much. What's the worst that could happen?" I cleaned out my office that afternoon. 14 years of career mementos, technical manuals, and personal items fit into 3 cardboard boxes. As I was packing my last drawer, Isla stopped by. "Alan, I just want you to know, no hard feelings, okay? This is just business. And who knows? Maybe this change will be good for everyone." I closed the drawer and looked at her. "I hope you're right, Isla. I genuinely do." And the strange thing was, part of me meant it. Part of me hoped she would prove me wrong, that her confidence would somehow translate into competence. But experience had taught me that hope and preparation weren't mutually exclusive. That weekend, I updated my LinkedIn profile and quietly reached out to my professional network. By the following week, I had 3 interview requests. By the end of that week, I had 2 serious job offers. The financial technology world is smaller than people realize, and word travels fast about available talent. One offer particularly caught my attention. An international investment fund based in New York was looking for someone to design a completely new trading system from scratch. The salary was 3 times what Pinnacle had been paying me. The signing bonus alone was more than my annual compensation. I accepted the position but negotiated a start date 8 weeks out, officially for personal time, but really because I had a feeling I might get some interesting phone calls before then. I didn't have to wait long for those interesting phone calls. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 12 days after I had left Pinnacle. I was sitting in my home office in Lincoln Park, reviewing architectural plans for my new position, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard Carrington's direct line. "Alan, thank God you answered." His voice was strained, almost frantic. "We need your help. There's been an incident with the system." I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair. "What kind of incident, Richard?" "Some data inconsistencies. Isla's team is handling it, but they wanted me to check if you might have some insights into the backup procedures." Data inconsistencies. In my world, that was like saying the Titanic had experienced a minor water intrusion. But I kept my voice neutral. "What specific inconsistencies are you seeing?" "Well, it's technical. Something about transaction logs not matching the database records. Isla says it's probably just a display issue." "A display issue?" I almost laughed. Transaction logs not matching database records meant one of 2 things. Either data was being corrupted, or data was disappearing. Neither was a display issue. "Have they checked the integrity of the backup systems?" I asked. "I think so." "Look, Alan, I know things ended awkwardly between us, but if you could just take a quick look." "Richard, I'm no longer an employee of Pinnacle. Any consulting work would need to go through proper channels, including legal agreements and compensation arrangements." There was a pause. Of course, we can work something out. How quickly could you come in?" "I'm afraid I'm not available today. I could potentially consult later this week depending on the terms." We hung up with vague promises of working something out. I knew Richard well enough to recognize panic in his voice, even when he was trying to hide it. More importantly, I knew Isla well enough to know she would never admit she needed help from the man she had replaced. Sure enough, my phone didn't ring again that day. It rang the next morning at 6:47 a.m. "Alan, it's Richard. We need you here now. Something's gone wrong with the system." "How wrong?" "We've lost about 3 million in transaction data from yesterday. It just vanished." I was quiet for a moment, processing this. 3 million in transactions didn't just vanish. Data doesn't spontaneously delete itself. Someone had made changes to the system without understanding the consequences. "What changes has Isla's team made to the core architecture?" They've been streamlining things, removing redundant protocols, updating some of the older code. Nothing major. Nothing major. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. Those redundant protocols were probably the safeguards I had built to prevent exactly this kind of data loss. The older code they had updated was likely the foundation that everything else depended on. Richard, I'll need to see a complete log of all system changes made since my departure, along with current access credentials and a formal consulting agreement that includes liability protection. How long will that take to arrange? For the paperwork? At least 24 hours if you expedite it through legal. 24 hours? Alan, we're bleeding money every minute this system is unstable. Then you should have thought of that before replacing your chief architect with an inexperienced team. The line went quiet. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice smaller than before. Please, Alan, name your price. It's not about price, Richard. It's about doing this properly. I'll wait for the formal consulting agreement. That afternoon, I got a call from Jake Morrison, my former second-in-command, who had somehow survived the purge. Jake was a solid engineer, someone I had mentored over the years. Alan, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I'm scared. His voice was barely above a whisper. They're making changes without understanding what they're doing. Today alone, they've disabled 3 security protocols and removed what they called legacy monitoring systems. Legacy monitoring systems. Those were my guardian angels, the automated scripts that caught and corrected problems before they became disasters. What's the current status, Jake? Transaction processing is down to about 60% efficiency. Error rates are climbing. And Isla keeps saying it's normal growing pains from the modernization process. Are they following the change management protocols? Jake laughed bitterly. What change management protocols? They said those procedures were bureaucratic obstacles to innovation. They're making changes in real time, no testing, no rollback procedures. I felt a chill run down my spine. Making untested changes to a live financial system was like performing surgery on a conscious patient without anesthesia. Theoretically possible, but virtually guaranteed to end badly. Jake, document everything you can. Every change, every decision, every error message. Email copies to your personal account. Why? Because when this blows up, and it will blow up, you don't want to be blamed for their mistakes. The next morning brought the call I had been expecting. Alan, we've got a crisis. Richard's voice was barely controlled panic. The system crashed at midnight. We've lost approximately $47 million in transaction data. $47 million. In 2 days, they had gone from losing $3 million to losing $47 million. The progression was exponential, which meant the underlying problem was getting worse, not better. Where's Isla? She's in emergency meetings with the board. Alan, they're talking about involving federal regulators. The SEC is asking questions. We need you here now. Have you prepared the consulting agreement? Yes, everything's ready. Just please come in. I arrived at Pinnacle at 2 p.m. that Thursday. The normally bustling office felt like a morgue. Employees were huddled in small groups, whispering. Several people from the IT department looked like they hadn't slept in days. Jake met me at the elevator. It's worse than I told you on the phone, he said quietly as we walked toward what used to be my office. They didn't just disable your monitoring systems. They deleted them completely. And when the cascading failures started, they tried to fix it by reverting to an old backup. Which backup? One from 6 months ago. My blood ran cold. Reverting to a 6-month-old backup would have erased half a year of transaction data, account updates, and system improvements. It was like trying to fix a broken leg by amputating it at the hip. Please tell me they didn't actually implement the revert. Jake's expression told me everything I needed to know. The conference room was packed with people I recognized, board members, department heads, legal counsel, and several men in dark suits who I didn't recognize but who had the unmistakable look of federal investigators. At the head of the table sat Isla, her designer clothes now wrinkled, her confident smile replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. Richard stood up when I entered. Everyone, This is Alan Strathmore, our former chief architect. Alan has graciously agreed to help us resolve the current technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. The euphemisms were almost impressive in their inadequacy. I took a seat and opened the laptop they had provided. It took me exactly 17 minutes to assess the full scope of the disaster. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, looking around the room, "you don't have technical difficulties. You have a complete system failure that has compromised the integrity of your entire financial database." The silence in that conference room was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's coffee cup being set down too hard on the table, the distant sound of Chicago traffic 32 floors below. But nobody spoke. Finally, one of the federal investigators leaned forward. "Mr. Strathmore, can you quantify the extent of the damage?" I turned my laptop screen toward the room and pulled up the diagnostic reports I had run. Based on the current state of the system, approximately $127 million in transaction data has been corrupted or lost entirely. The attempted restoration using outdated backups has created additional inconsistencies that affect roughly $340 million in account records. Isla's face went white. $340 million? That can't be right. Tyler ran diagnostics this morning and said we were looking at maybe $20 million in affected accounts. I looked at her directly. Tyler's diagnostics were measuring account balances, not data integrity. Those are two different things. The balances might look correct on the surface, but the underlying transaction history that justifies those balances is gone. One of the board members, Helen Vasquez, spoke up. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means that when the SEC audits this company, and they will audit this company, you won't be able to provide the transaction trail that proves how money moved through the system. From a regulatory standpoint, $340 million has effectively vanished without a trace." Richard was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. "Can it be fixed?" I paused, considering my words carefully. The technical answer is possibly, but it would require months of forensic reconstruction, assuming you can recover the deleted monitoring data. The practical answer is no, not within any time frame that would satisfy regulatory requirements. "But you built this system," Isla said, her voice rising. "You must have some kind of master key or back door or something." The accusation hung in the air. I could see where her mind was going. If the system failed this catastrophically after I left, maybe I had sabotaged it on my way out. "Ms. Carrington, everything I did during my tenure here was documented and legal. The system failed because critical safeguards were removed and untested changes were implemented without proper procedures. This isn't sabotage, it's consequences." One of the investigators was taking notes. "Mr. Strathmore, did you remove any code or system components when you left the company?" "I removed personal intellectual property that I had developed on my own time, following legal review and company policy. I also documented all of my changes and provided comprehensive handoff materials." Jake, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I can confirm that. Alan left detailed documentation of everything. We ignored most of it because Isla's team said the procedures were outdated." All eyes turned to Isla. Her confident facade was completely gone now, replaced by something that looked like a deer caught in headlights. "We were trying to modernize," she said weakly. "The old system was complicated and inefficient. We thought we could streamline it." "You thought you could streamline a system that handled $850 million in transactions without understanding how it worked?" The question came from Helen Vasquez, and her tone was ice cold. "We had consultants. We hired external experts." "Which consultants?" asked Richard. Isla fumbled with her phone, pulling up what looked like email contacts. "TechFlow Solutions. They specialize in financial system optimization." I had never heard of TechFlow Solutions, but Jake was shaking his head. "TechFlow is a web development company. They build marketing websites and mobile apps. I looked them up when Isla first mentioned them." The room erupted into angry whispers. Board members were leaning over to speak to their lawyers. The federal investigators were exchanging meaningful looks. Richard looked like he was about to have a heart attack. How much did you pay these consultants? Helen asked. $50,000 for the initial assessment and modernization plan, Isla replied. So not only had they destroyed a functioning system, but they had paid $50,000 to web developers to help them do it. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so catastrophic. One of the investigators cleared his throat. Mr. Strathmore, in your professional opinion, what are the company's options at this point? I closed my laptop and looked around the room. Legally, you need to immediately notify all affected clients and regulatory bodies of the data breach. Financially, you're looking at regulatory fines that could easily exceed the lost transaction amounts. Technically, you need to take the entire system offline until the data integrity issues can be resolved. Taking the system offline means we can't process any transactions, Richard said desperately. That would shut down our entire operation. Your entire operation is already compromised. The difference is that now you know it. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Lawyers were making frantic phone calls. Board members were arguing in hushed tones. Isla was crying quietly in the corner while Richard tried to comfort her and simultaneously figure out how to save his company. I packed up my laptop and stood to leave. Helen Vasquez intercepted me at the door. Alan, I want you to know that the board was only informed about the decision to replace you after it was finalized. That was Richard's unilateral call, influenced by family considerations. I nodded. I understand, Helen. Is there anything that can be done? Any way to salvage this situation? I thought about it for a moment. You could rebuild from scratch, start over with a completely new system. It would take about 2 years and cost roughly $50 million, assuming you can maintain your client base during the transition. Her face fell. And the chances of maintaining our client base after this? Close to zero. I left Pinnacle Financial Solutions for the second and final time at 6:30 p.m. that Thursday evening. By Friday morning, the story had leaked to the Chicago Tribune. By the weekend, it was national news. Financial firm loses hundreds of millions due to nepotism and incompetence. The SEC investigation lasted 8 months. Pinnacle was fined $485 million and forced to cease operations. Richard Carrington resigned in disgrace and declared personal bankruptcy to avoid personal liability. Isla never worked in the financial industry again. As for me, I started my new position in early May at Meridian International Fund in Manhattan. The signing bonus alone was more than I had made in 2 years at Pinnacle. My new office overlooked Central Park, and my new team treated me with the respect that comes from genuine appreciation of expertise. 8 months later, I received a LinkedIn message from Tyler, one of Isla's former team members. He had taken a job at a small startup in Austin and wanted to know if I had any advice for someone trying to rebuild their reputation after a career setback. I replied with one sentence: learn the difference between confidence and competence. The system I built for Meridian went live in July 2025, 2 months ahead of schedule and under budget. It processes over $2 billion in transactions daily and has never experienced an unplanned outage. The difference between that system and what happened at Pinnacle isn't just technical, it's cultural. At Meridian, experience is valued. Procedures are followed and nobody gets promoted based on their last name. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to Pinnacle. The answer is simple. You can't feel guilty about consequences that other people chose. I built them a system that worked flawlessly for 14 years. I documented everything properly. I offered to help with the transition. They chose to ignore expertise in favor of nepotism, and they paid the price that such choices inevitably demand. The best revenge isn't plotting someone's downfall. It's building something so successful that their failure becomes irrelevant to your story. Today, I'm designing financial systems that will be running long after most people have forgotten that Pinnacle Financial Solutions ever existed. That's not revenge. That's just moving forward with integrity intact. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.